Well, welcome all of you who are listening to us. It is I, Nick, Pennsylvania, as always with my good friend Brendan Bond.
Hello, everybody.
And we're here to have another conversation tonight. We apologize. We know we've been away for a couple weeks. It's been a very busy time. Not only am I in the midst of a busy period in my professional life, but also Bond and I are getting ready to do some recordings in a very old church, which we are very excited about. And Bond himself is involved with some theater thing and doing some audio stuff for them, which is I'm very excited for him. It's just been a very busy time. We haven't meant to be negligent, but I think you're going to be happy with what we're here to talk about tonight. It's a pretty popular topic, especially in our general region, but had to take a moment to say our most recent episode. What was that episode called again, Brendan?
That episode call was mile marker 197 or 127.
Mile marker 127, yes. And that was a return of our friend Brian. And we have just gotten so many really great compliments and comments about that episode in particular. I believe you were telling me it's one of our most listened to episodes in a short time.
Yeah, right now it has significantly more downloads than some of our recent episodes, which is always nice to see, because that means people are listening to it and then sharing it like at the time.
So if that was your introduction to us, we really want to thank you for coming back and checking us out again. I did want to read one of the comments. This comes from a listener. I'm just going to put AP out there. And he wrote, "The first episode I listened to, and I found Brian's story quite moving and profound. And I very much enjoyed the discussion, especially as trauma and the role it might play in paranormal events is something I often think about. Also made me wonder if a Ouija board has ever been used in a therapeutic setting as a way to get patients to open up about issues they may otherwise have trouble vocalizing, or whether such an idea would be just blocked by, maybe justified by, ethical concerns." So really appreciate AP writing that. It's always nice to get any sort of feedback. So if you please feel free to comment and write to us. But I spoke to Brian not long after that, and he wanted first to thank the kind comments, and he also wanted to add that approaching trauma can include many techniques that alter neural networks and reduce adverse symptoms. To my knowledge, a spiritual device may or may not project a person's trauma or psychic energy, but doesn't necessarily show evidence to alleviate symptoms, even if the cultural, religious connotations are removed. Helping people talk about trauma is certainly a necessary, but not sufficient condition to treating trauma successfully. So just more and more talk and food for thought. And yeah, we went into a really interesting place talking a lot about trauma. I don't know if you had any additional comment, Brendan.
Yeah, I just thought, again, want to thank Brian and thank everyone who, like you were saying, Nick, we got feedback from a number of folks, both officially and unofficially. I think that the thread that ties all of that together is that whether or not people necessarily believe in Ouija boards as like a way to connect to the spirit world, everyone who I talked to was like, yeah, something weird obviously happened, and something traumatic happened. And talking about the trauma around paranormal events is something that doesn't get enough eyes on it, because it is a big part of it for a lot of people. And this was obviously like a significant event in multiple ways for Brian. And the feedback that we got specifically about using the Ouija board as like a device to get people to open up and everything, I think that's a fascinating idea, because you have, like, I know for myself, as someone who's very into role-playing games, like RPGs, and play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, people do and say and emote things whenever they're acting through some sort of like conduit that they maybe normally wouldn't. And I have seen how transformative that can be And I mean, I don't want to say therapeutic in that maybe a clinical sense, but therapeutic in a casual, mundane sense.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, because I mean, I have folks that have kids, might have trouble connecting with folks or emoting at the level they'd like to, but you give them a way to do that through something else. It kind of removes the self from it a little bit, and it gives them a chance to practice and try things out.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, in this case, I'm deferring to Brian's professional judgment, but I think I just think it's a fascinating question that I think warrants some more looking.
Now, again, for those of you who maybe haven't listened to us before, both Bond and myself, we live north of Pittsburgh. That's in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, here in the United States. And there is in our area one of the most often talked about haunted roads, well, in just about all America. And it frequently appears in different haunted roads, haunted books. There was that Weird USA book and all the subsequent state books that it initiated, and it's featured in those as well. So I'm going to pass that over to Bond, who was recently over at this place with his brother and recorded some audio on site there. What do you have to say?
This location, I'll once we start the on-site audio, I kind of introduce it a little bit to my brother because he originally wasn't familiar with it initially either. It was one of those places that I had heard about a lot but never actually been to. And when going through one of the many folklore and haunted place books that I read, gave the location, I'm like, oh geez, that's like 25 minutes from my house. Headed down to Allegheny County and decided to take a little stroll down this road. I emphasize stroll because when you guys hear the audio, you will notice very prominently we are on a road, and it's amazing how loud footsteps are on a road whenever it's quiet. That's one thing I noticed when going through the audio.
Well, let's take a few minutes now and let's just give a listen to Bond and his brother Brian, not to be confused with our friend Brian, their casual stroll down one of these supposedly most haunted roads in the United States.
Okay, so me and Brian are walking down what is technically called Irving Road, just outside of North Park in Allegheny County. But it is also known as Blue Mist Road.
How far does it go?
I'm not sure how far it goes. So the stories back here, apparently the stories date back to like the 50s and 60s, from what I could find, looking at a few sources. The earliest accounts say that there was KKK activity back here, and that there was a tree that they used to hang people from. There's a lot of trees back here.
I have heard that. A car wreck.
Yes, there's a car wreck as well, apparently.
They have like the same tree.
Yeah, the same tree. And it's hard to tell what tree it is, apparently, except on full moons,
Not a full moon right now.
it'll bleed, apparently. What's that water?
Yes,
Yeah. Is this a culvert or something?
I can see it. I can
Yeah.
see it.
Because there's that inlet that comes back here. I don't think it comes back here too far. I think it's pretty deep down in there. Higher up than what I expected.
Yeah.
But it's funny, the road isn't maintained. It says authorized vehicles only, but there's like a fresh yellow line painted on it.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering how far back this goes. Looks like a park road.
Mm-hmm.
Like a park service road.
Yeah.
I don't know why they would put, unless it's
Like a maintenance dump
I
or
don't know
something.
why they would paint it.
Yeah. It's definitely painted.
It's well taken care of.
Yeah. There are some blue jays going nuts that were back here. But yeah, one of the stories is that the same tree got hit by like a family driving in a car kind of thing. And the blue mist, what they call Blue Mist Road, apparently is this blue mist shows up before accidents or creepy stuff happens.
Was the KKK stuff ever confirmed?
I don't think so. I mean, I couldn't find. I mean, everything I found sounded like it was just citing the same.
Like not a murder.
Yeah. But also apparently there's like witch coven and like cult activity back here as well.
Big old box.
What was that?
A big old bird box.
Oh yeah, look at that. Right now, yeah. Apparently there's cult activity back here. Apparently there was a house somewhere on this road where they used to perform rituals and such. Got a whiff of something not good.
You guys took it?
Yeah, I mean we just got a whiff of. Ugh. Something's dead back here.
Is this where they toss that deer?
Ugh. Yeah, if we see a deer hanging from a tree, we're leaving. But again, like you said, couldn't find any articles actually confirming any of the deaths that are apparently associated with back here.
Did you think you would have heard that?
Yeah.
Like, I think everybody would know if the KKK was hanging people in the 50s and 60s back there. I think
There'd be, yeah.
it would be well known. So this was a pretty strong area for the KKK.
Exactly, yes. I mean, it's like, it's feasible, but you'd think that, like, yeah.
Do you know when the roads closed?
No, I mean, well, still kind of open.
Well, closed to the public.
What kind of bird is that?
Something like water birds.
Yeah. Red-tailed hawk.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Look at them.
There's a couple of them.
There's a few of them. They're not happy about something. It is kind of creepy back in here. Because look how dark the woods are over there.
Yeah, there's just some big woods back in there.
Yeah. Like it's not like what you'd expect. Like half a mile from North Park.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's like marshy down here, but then it just like turns into some straight up
Yeah.
tall trees.
Those red-tailed hawks are not happy. What's going on over there?
I don't know, unless they're just talking to each other.
Maybe. I think it's not like what they do though, but okay, let's start moving back. It looks like it goes for a little while up there.
Actually, no, it doesn't.
Oh really? You look at the map?
Yeah, it stops.
Probably where that turn is right there,
You
yeah.
want to go up and look at it?
Yeah, let's walk a little further. Did you hear voices?
Yeah.
People somewhere over there. Again, we're not that far from the park, so. Yeah, but once the sun goes down back here, it's pretty dark. I think it gets dark quick. I feel like any place where you have like a road, high ground on one side, and like impassable open area on the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you feel kind of vulnerable. Like if you told me Mel Gibson with some muskets was hanging out behind those trees up there, I believe it. Yeah. Apparently there's a mail, or at least is or was a mailbox down here where the cult house used to be.
Yeah, I don't know if this area just gives you a vibe because of like
The topography. We're primed in the topography. I don't think helps. Those red-tailed hawks being pissed isn't great either. There's someone parked down here.
Huh?
Let's turn around. I think it's probably maintenance, but still. Yeah, all those pine trees over there are kind of creepy. This is going to help. Yeah. And again, we're not that far from, I mean, Babcock Boulevard's right at the top of the hill over there.
Yeah.
And you have the villa on the other side of the road. So you're not far from houses, really. You do feel very isolated down in here. But as far as the house stuff goes, I haven't seen any like old driveways or what you consider like a foundation.
Yeah.
There's
Back
only-
there, it looked like it was kind of opened up.
Maybe a little bit more back there, you know. Because you're not building down in there. In the marsh area, there's all these dead trees, which again just like look creepy. But again, we saw those other two folks walking. So like, obviously people come back here. It's not like it's not used.
No graffiti or anything.
Yeah, which is that's kind of the weird thing. You think there'd be more?
Trash.
Yeah, so it's surprisingly clean. You're right. Yeah, imagine coming back here on like a full moon. You know, because even with there being some light left, we're getting into the evening, but it's not like dusk yet. But what are you saying?
Those vines.
Oh wow, look at all those.
Like snakes.
Yeah, it looks like almost like it's like the kind of vines you see in like movies. Like it doesn't look real. What? Something's dead.
Maybe this is vegetation.
It might be. It is weird how maintained this road actually is. Like there's roads I don't normally drive on that are worse than this. There's deer.
Yeah.
Right there. Oh, that's actually reminds me. One of the stories is about a not deer. This is definitely a deer though. But it is weird
What's up, man?
how he's like 15 feet from us. But apparently there's a deer man or like a not deer back here that walks on two legs. Forgot about that part. It's weird that he was there to remind me.
A lot of dead trees back there.
A lot of dead trees, yeah. I don't see nothing. No tree looks like it's been bleeding recently though. Just had a full moon just a little bit ago. But I can't think of what that could be like mistaken for, you know. Like obviously sap.
Yeah, but I like don't know anything about trees.
Yeah, not an arborist. So that was our little trip down Blue Mist Road, or also known as Irving Road, just outside of North Park in northern Allegheny County. We actually spent about 25 minutes walking around there. Obviously, I pared down the audio to just kind of like the actual tidbits of us kind of talking about it while we were there. But I definitely have a few takeaways that I thought were interesting, and I would like to hear what you think about it as well, Nick. So one, it's a good example of a place that has, you know, a lot of supposed history that when you actually look at the documentation outside of like these folklore books, not a whole lot. For the most part, every news article I could come across in my search talked about the stories, but did not cite much in the way of sources for them actually being credible. One of the first ones was just the fact that it was supposedly a KKK rally point where they apparently hung people. And my brother brought something up very quickly in that audio where it's like, well, if that was the case in the 50s and 60s, there would be much more documentation about it.
Well, and a lot of the stories I read, people cite like 1915. Well, in the 1920s, KKK rallies, Ku Klux Klan rallies, were not all that uncommon across
Correct.
much of the United States. They had a surge in membership in the immediate wake. Some people cite Birth of a Nation, the W. Griffith's film, which again was a point in filmmaking. It has some film things, but of course it has also this really reprehensible, racist view of the United States. And it depicts, for those of you not familiar with the film, it depicts the Ku Klux Klan as these saviors, of course. And so the Ku Klux Klan, my historical understanding, was pretty much dead, or very small pockets until after that film. So when people are saying that in 1915, that's the year I hear most often cited for these rallies and rituals, well, they weren't really that much of a thing until maybe 5 years later, 3 years later. If there were lynchings, they would probably be in more populated regions than in the park. And there definitely were lynchings in Pittsburgh. Let's not think that there weren't. I believe, I know I was reading about the boxer Jack Johnson, and I know that there were lynchings in the wake of his big victory out west. But yeah, so the Ku Klux Klan thing, did they have rallies there? I have no doubt, just because they've had rallies here in the town that I live in our old trolley park back in the 20s. So that's not surprising, but actual lynchings, they wouldn't have, I don't think they would have dragged somebody out that far. They would have done it out in front of that poor person's house.
The paranormal element to this is that there's a specific tree that they used, which from what I found in the folklore books said that this was also a tree that a family crashed a car into. And this tree in particular bleeds blood during the full moon. There's a lot to kind of like unpack there, I think. There were no trees that we came across that looked to be that old. As far as like candidates go, like I'm not even sure where that one kind of comes from. But that was one of the things they say with this road. It's called Blue Mist Road, is the nomenclature. How it sits, and me and my brother talk a little bit about the topography. It's kind of like there's like this low boggy land it's like a bottom. It's kind of swampy. The road is up on the south side of that sits up halfway up a hill where it's cut in, and then the hill goes sharply up to the south on your right side if you're walking north.
And there is a creek that hugs to the one side of the road for a while too.
Yes. So the idea of there being mist on this road, very likely. Like as far as atmospheric phenomena, very likely there would be mist.
Conditions are very favorable.
Exactly. Yeah. So like,
and I've seen it there before.
Yeah. So like, and so that part of it, yeah, I'm sure there is some creepy mist back there. Some of the other things that we kind of came across that I thought were interesting was we ran into a deer at one point, and it was kind of weird because this deer, I assume it's a North Park deer, so it's used to people. This thing was way too chill being like 10 feet from us. It was a little odd.
Especially if it knew your history with deer.
Right, exactly. It knows that as much as I attempt to hunt deer, boy, is it safe around me. This guy's not a threat. But it was kind of weird, but just kind of coming across it because like there's like no room for there to be animals kind of down there next to the road. And we'd kind of come across, we just were walking. There's this little like berm where there's no bushes, and there's just this deer looking at us. And that reminded me, one of the stories about Blue Mist Road is that there is either in some places what they call a deer man, which is like a half deer, half man kind of minotaur type thing. Other places I found said that it's a normal deer, but it walks upright, like on its hind legs. And a few other descriptions had it almost sounded like a mix between like a deer and like a wolf, kind of like a very aggressive deer, which
half man, half deer, half wolf.
Exactly. It's kind of like man, bear, pig. What that kind of reminded me of was a lot of the Nick, are you familiar with the term that's been kind of popularized only in the last few years of what's called a knot deer? N-O-T.
No, but that's something when listening to the audio that I heard you mention to Brian a few times.
Yeah, so
and I'm assuming it's like, oh, that's a deer, but that's not a deer.
Yes. You're not far off. This is something I've only been kind of initiated into the last few years, and I don't think it was very popular before that. What it is it's a category of, I guess you could say, cryptid, where people see what is obviously supposed to be a deer, but something is very wrong with it. In the sense that like it looks like a deer when you first look at it or when you glance at it, but once you look at it closely, there are things about it that are like just kind of like wrong, and that's what I call it, a knot deer. Everything from, again, it walking on two legs to it having just different formations, or it being colored like a deer, but it looks like it's a bipedal animal walking on all fours. I know both. I know Expanded Perspectives and a few other podcasts have done like specific episodes around not deer. I'd like to do some research and do one ourselves, because the myriad of how many stories there are is just kind of interesting, and they seem like it's a weird thing to make up. If people are just coming.
I'm
going to
throw this out there. Just a couple things. It seems like the timeline you're giving is coinciding with our recent bash of chronic wasting disease, which some of our deer population here in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, and New York and West Virginia have suffered recently. What's more, on top of that, our deer numbers here in Western Pennsylvania are actually higher than natural numbers should be.
Yeah,
exactly. Which is something that a lot of people, particularly in the hunting community, might have a hard time coming to terms with. But it's simple fact: the current populations are not sustainable. They're much larger, which makes me wonder, because I'm sure you've heard of culling. Their deer numbers are getting so big, they're getting into really suburban and frankly urban suburban communities around the city of Pittsburgh itself and around Cleveland as well. And so people that wouldn't be exposed to deer might be seeing some deer activity that they're not accustomed to. Deer, as you know, will get up on their hind legs on occasion, particularly when they're sparring. And you're shouting something, but you're muted, so go right on.
No, I was just agreeing with you. I've seen deer. We used to have a crabapple tree out in the back of our yard. Deer would get up on their hind legs to eat the higher up crab apples.
Sweet apples.
Yeah, exactly. And seeing a deer walk even a few steps on two legs looks really uncanny. Like it
looks like a Salvador Dali painting.
Yeah, it's really odd. So this is good. I'm glad you're into this. So I think we're going to have to keep an eye out, people, for a not deer episode from us sometime in the near future, I think.
I like it. I'm already dismissing it. That's how much I like it.
That's how much. But along with what we saw down there, one of the other big things, which again, because of the time period, I think you'll have a few thoughts on, was apparently down this road there was a house. Now, to be clear, the road that we're on is closed technically. It goes up a ways. Apparently, it stops. There is apparently a path. Then it actually starts from the northern end as well too, like the road from a historical standpoint. We were only on the southern portion of this road, which is the bulk of it. There's apparently supposed to be a house, or was supposed to be a house on this road that used to be a satanic coven house, and there's apparently a lot of witchcraft and the like that goes on down this road, which considering a lot of that lore you saw coming out in the 80s and 90s, I think we know what that kind of correlates to.
Correlates with the great satanic panic of our childhood. Yeah. Now, may I interject something here? Okay, so this is one of those things that I think we like to read into, we like to utilize as a springboard for stories. The road, the section that you were walking that you mentioned, is closed off, and there are actually two side streets that break off from it. And I believe there is still remnants of one building off one of these side streets that, again, also decommissioned, closed off. Part of the greater Blue Mist Trail, this older section of Irwin Road that's closed. And there are also a couple foundations. Now, here's the thing about foundations. As you know, there is a lake near us that was created in the early 70s, 60s, 70s, and a couple towns were raised in order to create this. Now, foundations are oftentimes mundane, but foundations, especially when they've been let go, it's a stone or old brick foundation, look spooky. And we tend to project it as being older than what it really is. And I think this has a lot to do with the origins of the witch house. Because there is another foundation down the road, and people say, well, it was in this house that a father killed his family and then put their bodies into the septic tank, which, okay, not the best way to treat a septic system, because that's only going to create bigger problems in a very short time. So unless he moved away immediately thereafter. So I guess the bottom line is, when you see a foundation, don't automatically assume it's hundreds of years old. But I think that has a lot to do with those stories. There is, of course, I'm sure you saw it, there is an old mailbox still along the road, and I've seen people talk about, well, people have carved KKK and 666 into the mailbox. Well, yeah, but I see those same things carved into the side of Sheetz restroom stalls and across truck stops across America, and I don't think those are all necessarily haunted as well. So that's okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry. That's just me going on there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think the origins in that sense match up. I think that again, a lot of times it's such an easy, quick thing to be like, oh, it's Satan, it's witches or it's Satanists or whatever. There's very rarely any correlation, and even if there was, what harm would that mean? None. Now, one of the other things that we kind of came across when we were down there that you do hear a lot in various paranormal stuff is foul smells. And we've talked many times before about, brimstone deceit and stuff like that. And we were about halfway down the road and did run into one of these like walls of smell where where it smelled like something dead, and I think my brother said maybe it was just vegetation like from the swamp and everything, and it very well might have been. And I'm not saying this was paranormal. I'm saying it was probably a natural phenomenon. It was probably a natural occurrence. But you can see how if someone's like kind of like primed and looking for weird things, that's one more thing that might set people off. Is this smell of death in the air kind of thing?
Injured deer. Where do they go to? Where do the injured deer go?
They go to low spots. Exactly.
Low spots, and they go to water.
Exactly.
And you got both of those things right there. So you could have come across a dead deer. You could have skunk cabbage is in season, if I'm not mistaken, and that grows rampant around there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I wish people would be better descriptive in what they're smelling, but unfortunately, it's either sulfur or death, and I mean, death and antifreeze don't all the time smell all that different to me.
Right. Yeah. It's one thing. This definitely just smelled like a dead animal, in my opinion. That's what I thought it smelled like. But I just thought it was interesting that we did kind of come across it, because that's just one more thing.
Right.
One of the other things that was, I'm not gonna lie. So the road itself, again, for anyone else who's been there, it is a bit creepy. I'm not gonna lie. It is a bit creepy. And one of the kind of, again, very natural elements that made it so creepy was because we're so close to North Park right there. I'd say we're probably 300-400 yards through the woods from one of the trails in North Park. But there was more than one occasion where you could hear people talking, but not loud enough that you could tell what they were saying. If you would have asked me how close they were, I wouldn't have guessed 300-400 yards. It sounded closer, kind of thing. But clearly, there wasn't anyone like down in the swamp, kind of thing.
No.
So sound in a bowl like that, sound kind of naturally does weird things.
And there's also some parts of the abandoned stretch come right up near to the backyards, because there's been some housing development in the North Park area as well over the past, I'd say since we left high school, there's been some increased building over there. And so, part of that road actually hugs the property line for a number of houses. Yeah, so it may have even been people just in their backyard.
Yeah, it could have been. And so that's the thing, is I feel like anytime you're in a place where you may hear voices where you don't feel like you should be around anybody and you can't see them, that's just one more thing that I think can freak people out, Oh,
for sure.
And understandably so. Like, I mean...
Yeah. And like you've mentioned, topographically, there's a lot of elements with the water, with the hilliness, the uneven terrain. It's dark back there.
Mm-hmm. It is dark.
There's a lot of different things that can be off-putting. And if you are not accustomed to being kind of in the woods, there's that element too, because again, these parks were created quite some time ago for people from the city to take the train to trolley out to and enjoy time in the woods.
Yeah, and one of the other things, again, the very natural occurrence, but something that can be freaky, was I got about 2/3 of the way down the road, there were 3 red-tailed hawks that were absolutely going ballistic on the other side of the swamp. And again, not paranormal, But whenever you're in a place that has all these other things kind of going on, and especially if you're not used to, again, the sounds of nature kind of thing, it's just real off-putting. Like, it's just like, that does not sound fun, kind of thing. It definitely put us in kind of like a weird mood hearing these birds like lose their shit. Because again, you mentioned earlier, as people who are in the woods quite often, whether for fishing or hunting or hiking or whatever, we know like blue jays. There's times where you'll be in a quiet piece of woods, you go somewhere and suddenly the blue jays go crazy because you're there and you're not supposed to be. And it makes you feel like you've set off an alarm system and you're not supposed to be there almost.
Well, and we've talked before in other episodes about fox noises and how absolutely terrifying that can be.
Exactly. So I think there was a number of things that just kind of like felt weird about it. One of like, again, the mundane things that just kept that I wasn't like prepared for was this road's been closed for quite some time. That being said, two things that were kind of weird about that. Just not weird, but just like I didn't expect. It was very clean back there. There was almost no garbage or litter. Like to the point where we were trying to find it, we couldn't, which is great. But like, it was just like, it's kind of weird. Two, the lines on the road were like freshly painted, which like it kind of weirded me out because my brother, who's done a lot of work with municipalities, said at one point, he's like, I can say from a municipal standpoint, there is no reason to paint this road, kind of thing.
Especially since the closed section sits behind guardrails.
Exactly. Yeah. And so whenever we got towards about the halfway point, we did come across, we could see that there was a white truck parked back there, which I'm assuming was maintenance or something like that.
Right, park maintenance.
Yeah, but given the time of day that was and everything, we just didn't want to mess with them, whoever it was, kind of thing. Whether it was someone working or people just hanging out, we're like, you know what? They're obviously doing whatever they're doing back here. So we kind of turned around.
So far, you've covered legends surrounding the mist itself. People say it has a blue tint. You've covered the supposed hanging tree, which I think we're both pretty dismissive of. Not improbable, but not totally probable.
Certainly, there's no cursed tree bleeding blood on the full moon down this road.
Yeah, and you covered, we talked about the witch house. I brought in one of the stories you haven't brought up, and this was the one that I had always heard because I was introduced to this through my friend Jared. And Jared and I in high school had gone back there a few times ourselves looking for a cemetery. But the cemetery isn't actually off Blue Mist Road or Irwin Road. The cemetery is actually a little past Irwin Road off of 910. The story there says that there are two gravestones which on full moons they will touch. Now, if you go online and read about this, people say, well, some of these gravestones are from the 1700s. No, they are not. Some of the people were born in the 18th century, but the oldest gravestone, the oldest death date, I think, is from the 1820s. So it's like, okay, that's me being irrationally nitpicky about the whole thing. But this falls back to what I was saying about foundations and our desire for the sake of these stories to make things older than they actually are. But that was a story I had always heard, is that on a full moon, you go back down this road, and on that full moon, these two gravestones will lean into one another and touch. Now, Jared had found from a friend pretty good authority, if there's any such thing in these sort of stories, these supposed gravestones, and they were about 70 years apart in death date. So why would they be leaning together?
So they're not like jilted lovers or anything.
Well, that's what the story always was. It was,
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. So
that's kind of, and I think in those like weird USA, weird Pennsylvania books, I think that was the story that they gave.
Yeah.
Now, again, the cemetery isn't on Irwin Road. It is still in use. It is a very well-maintained cemetery. But if you had a cemetery off of the closed section of that road, you would have a perfect 300 game though for just spooky elements.
If we were playing spooky Western PA bingo, you'd be
there. You go.
You'd be taking $5 home tonight.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so that's interesting, and I think that like a lot of places have a weird vibe to them for one reason or another. I think they lend themselves, like you said, to just collecting these types of stories, whether they have any provenance at all. I just think like it's just like ripe for it, you know. Because I mean, there are other places around Pittsburgh that are, you know, relatively famous. Like we have our version of a Gravity Hill, we have 13 Bends, and we have all these other roads in the area that are supposedly haunted. I think because this one is closed,
right,
and you can walk down it, that's led to all of these. I bet if you closed 13 Bends Road, you know, for 50 years, it would have similar stories after that period of time.
I have no doubt about that. In fact, there's a Gravity Hill not but a mile from Irwin Road, maybe less than a mile. I think in Pennsylvania, the most famous Gravity Hill is the one right outside of Bedford. However, the one in North Park, just immediately north of Pittsburgh, has gotten a lot of attention.
And again, that's why I just think a lot of this folklore is so reflective of the times, like we've said, with like the Satanic Panic and everything.
Especially since that road was closed then. I think the road was closed in the 60s.
I believe that's what I found as well, was about that time frame. I wish I would have written that down, but
it's my understanding, and I could be wrong. I did read something along these lines some time ago, and I was trying to find that information in preparation for our conversation today, but I believe that section of Irwin Road was closed in the 60s because there weren't, by that point, those houses, late 60s, early 70s, that point there weren't really any houses left on it, or they were abandoned anyway, and it coincided with they rerouted Babcock Road, which Babcock Road runs kind of parallel there. And there's actually an old Babcock Road that comes to a dead end, if I remember correctly.
Up north of there a little bit. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's that. Yeah. Let me share this with you because we were talking.
Yes.
I've had a summer of raccoon issues, and so. All right, let me back this up a little bit. So I've had raccoons in the chimney. I've got 3 chimneys on my house, and I had raccoons in at least 2 of them. Now, the house was built a little over 100 years ago, about 1915. So who knows how many generations, untold generations of raccoons have lived happily in the chimneys of this house in all those years. But we finally got them screened off, so no more chimney raccoons. But I was visiting my grandfather, who is an older guy. It's he's not far from 90. He's closer to 90 than he is 80, we'll say. I was talking about, well, we kind of said like this whole raccoon thing has given me a deep sense of purpose in my life. And we said, there's only 7 stories and one is man versus nature, and this is
right.
This is clearly what was thought when those. But the other week, I had somebody say, in my professional life, there was somebody that mentioned that her cousin was a professional wrestler in the 80s and 90s. He was one half of the Nasty Boys and was in the WWE, WWF, and all that jazz. I wasn't super familiar with it. And someone says, that's more of a Nick story, isn't it? That sounds more like something Nick would say. And somewhere between that and the raccoons, somehow I never heard this story before. My grandmother brought it up and I had to ask my grandfather about it. This is a true story. So years ago, early 1960s, okay? Maybe 65 at the very latest, according to what they remembered. Now, they lived in a little town. You know where the town is. You've been there before. This is out more towards central Pennsylvania. And he was at home by himself. Grandma was out, I think, with my father, who was born in the late 50s, 58. And they were down town because there was a traveling circus was in town. Anyhow, at some point, he hears some knocking, scratching on the front door. So he just opens the door, as you do, and a raccoon just walks in and just starts calmly walking through the house. And at first he's like, oh hell, there's a wild raccoon now in the house. And you get bats in the house here sometimes. And I remember he kept a tennis racket by his favorite chair because bats would sometimes get in. You'd have to swing a tennis racket in his shadow. But at some point, pretty quickly, he realizes, no. This raccoon is far too chill, far too tame. This must belong to the circus. He gets it in a box. It goes willingly. And he walks it down to a circus. And sure enough, the raccoon was part of the circus. So one of the guys there had these tame raccoons. But here's the thing. It's like 3.5 blocks to get to Main Street where the circus was happening. They close off Main Street 322 right there. And I'm thinking, how many doors did this raccoon knock on before my grandfather let him in? And what was he after?
That is a fantastic story. I have to wonder, like as you said, how many doors did the raccoon knock on? I'd like to think that he had a certain affinity for your grandfather and was just like, you know what, this guy will understand me. This guy will help me get home.
These are all probable answers, but the thing is, he had never met my grandfather before that night, so not a paranormal story by any means. In my head,
he had already been to the museum and seen the raccoons. I gotcha.
The circus. I don't know if he had been, but no, he said there's something about this is off. There's a circus in town. Certainly, circuses have animals, and I don't recall Barnum and Bailey having people riding on the backs of big raccoons on their flyers or anything. But somehow he connected the things, and there you go.
That's fantastic.
So, not a paranormal story, not a spooky story, just kind of a weird story. I felt like sharing after a summer of doing battle with wild raccoons. Yeah,
right. We're going to have more stories for you guys coming up here. We have, as we always say, we have lots of stuff in the hopper. I know we have some places we want to go. We have a few guests lined up, some new, some old. We have various books to read to bring you stories from. We have various declassified government documents that we've recently got our hands on.
We've recently lifted from the secret base.
Yeah. The secret base of Facebook. Hey man, you find government documents all over the place. No, but hopefully we'll have a few UFO centric episode for you guys sometime soon, because we haven't done one of those in a while.
But if you have stories, be they about raccoons or really anything, how do you reach out to us?
You can find us on Instagram or Facebook at The Ghost Furnace, or you can just email us at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.